Y'all, I could not be more excited about this episode of the CPR show. My very first CPR show interview. And the guest of honor is somebody I am such a huge fan of. Y'all are probably familiar with him. It is Patrick Boyle. He is the mastermind behind the On Finance YouTube channel and podcast. He is a teacher. He is formerly a hedge fund manager, and he is just so much fun to listen to. His videos are always just full of dry wit. He's got a lovely European sensibility, a nice dry sense of humor, and it's just so much fun to chat with him. So in today's episode, we talk about how Patrick got his start professionally, how he ended up starting his own hedge fund, running his own hedge fund. We talk a little bit about Ray Dalio. We've both read the book The Fund, which is about Ray Dalio in Bridgewater. I got his thoughts there. I also asked him whether he thinks investing is harder today than it was 20 years ago. We also, of course, talk about crypto and the meme coin economy and Ryan Cohen a bit, who, if you don't know, was very instrumental in the whole GameStop run-up and some of the activity around Bed Bath & Beyond. And then, of course, I had to ask him about his YouTube success, his YouTube career as a creator myself. I'm interested in understanding how he does what he does, how he's found success. So we get a little bit into that. And we close with some Elon Musk chatter because, it's not a conversation in 2023 unless you're talking a little bit about Elon Musk. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. I hope you do. Patrick and I had so much fun chatting. We actually kept talking for like 45 minutes after I had stopped recording because we were just having so much fun. So hopefully this is as fun to listen to and to watch as it was to make. And with that, enjoy my conversation with Patrick Boyle. Patrick Boyle, welcome to the CPR show. Thank you so much for being here.
On. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm such a fan. We're on take 2 of this because I was having some tech difficulties. A little bit newer to the YouTube scene. I take a lot of cues from you and your videos, and you're giving me tips now, which I appreciate. As so folks notice, it's a slightly different camera look than usual. But anyway, Patrick, I'm so glad to have you here. And I've watched so many of your videos, and then I've also watched a number of conversations you've had with other people where you've been interviewed. And I actually haven't heard that much about your background and your story. And you've got this kind of amazing story. You ran a hedge fund. You then started teaching. Obviously, now you've had this tremendous success on YouTube. And I'd love to just start by getting a little bit of that backstory. So I know you are from Ireland, then moved to the US, moved to London. Was it work? What got you country hopping like that? How did you get your start professionally?
Well, I was actually born in the United States, but both of my parents were Irish. So I went kind of at about the age of 5, we returned to Ireland where I grew up. But, I used to always kind of come over summers and things like that to the States. And really just when I graduated, I just really liked it in the United States. It seemed like a place where I could have more of a career, but even I just kind of liked living in the US. So yeah, I graduated university, moved to the US and started looking for a job.
You moved here without work lined up.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone graduates university without work lined up, it's
I don't know. A lot of, I guess it's like different economy now. I feel like kids I knew, if they didn't have work lined up, they like moved back in with their parents,
Yeah.
That's a bold move. It feels like it takes some courage. And then was your first job in finance? Was it in like the hedge fund world or how did you get?
Well, it was in wealth management because, I just largely, I found the world of investing interesting. And in truth, I knew nothing about it, obviously starting out. And so I worked in wealth management and started to learn quite a bit about how people think about stocks, bonds, that kind of thing, but very much in kind of an instinctive manner. It was an interesting thing because when I started out, I was quite young. And of course, when you're 22 years old, you feel you should be at the top of everything. But the problem is that you don't really know very much. And you're at least I didn't know very much, and I wasn't necessarily that useful in the office. And I noticed that the older guys that I worked with, you'd work with guys in their 50s and 60s. And they just had this deep knowledge of the history of markets. When you talked about interest rates, they'd say, well, back in years ago, things were this way. And so and they would explain their decision making around the market history that they knew. And so I sort of felt, as a young person, I didn't know that history. And so I kind of had to learn it. And it was sort of it was the late 90s, early 2000s, and I had access to computers, which was kind of a new thing to have your own computer and the internet with all of the data that was on it. And so I thought the only way I could reasonably know how investment decisions that you might make would work out would be to basically pull down a whole bunch of data
Mm,
and then just say, well, what happens if, 20 years ago I decided to start buying all the cheap stocks, by, we'll say, PE ratio, or if I decided to buy the highest growing stocks, or if I, a whole bunch of questions like that. And so actually, kind of because I turned up in another country without very many, I didn't really know anyone, and I had a new job and a new computer. I spent a lot of my free time just trying to work out how investing and how the stock market worked, and that's
mm.
kind of really what led me in the direction I went in.
Wow. And so, when people think about running a hedge fund, that's like a very, to some, very sexy job. To others, I guess, probably a very evil job. But in any case, it's like seen as a status symbol for sure. Like, how did you end up there? How long in your career had you been going before you set off on this thing?
Quite a while. So I launched the fund, I feel, in 2011 or 2012. And so I had about, maybe about 13 or 14 years of investing experience. And I'd worked at good hedge funds and I'd run
Mm,
the strategy internally at banks and things like that as well. So I had plenty of experience investing, but for me, even a big part of launching my own business was just that the world of prop trading within investment banks kind of disappeared at
mm,
the end of the credit crunch, and that's where there would have been a lot of jobs doing what I did. And I just worked out that basically I could get a job and then you work for one person and that kind of goes well or it doesn't. Or I could rent a small office and people would invest with me. And essentially, if you have 10 customers, you have 10 jobs, and if one of them leaves, you've still got nine
I
jobs,
know.
And so in a funny way, I almost did it with this idea of job security, that as long as I could
Mm.
kind of keep running my trading strategy, which had worked for a long time, it seemed reasonable to me. It just almost seemed, yeah, it seemed easier at the time than getting jobs at hedge funds.
That's interesting. And were your early clients folks that had been essentially clients of yours at these other hedge funds? Like, how did you get those in that initial flow of funds?
I put my own money in, like, so my first client was me, and no, it was kinda interesting. So, there were a few people I'd met in the industry who were interested in investing. Actually, it was a bit of an interesting thing because you go out, when you launch a fund, you basically have to jump in the deep end. Like, you put in place this legal structure, which is expensive. You make announcements, you rent an office, you hire in people, and then and you still have no clients. And then you go out and pitch to people. And so when you have a good broker to deal with, the broker kind of, their goal is, if you grow, they grow, right?
Mhm.
And so your broker will often, they'll host these kind of events and things like that. It's capital introduction. And basically you use your own contacts, you get on LinkedIn and things like that, but you also, people introduce you, or there's people who've heard your reputation, and you sit down and you meet with them and you explain what you do and how it's worked in the past and why it might work in the future. And two is, it was a little bit interesting for me because a lot of the people who I thought would invest on day one didn't really invest. And then a
Mm,
bunch of different people who I didn't expect to invest did invest. So,
mm.
you don't really know what will
It's
happen.
always the way it goes, I feel like. Well, I wanna talk a little bit about what your trading strategy was during that phase of your career, but I may save that for the end as we talk a bit more about markets and the economy and quant trading, and you explain all that to me, and explain to me why, this all isn't just bullshit. Because to some degree, I don't know, maybe it's having spent too long in the crypto world, I'm just convinced that, like, everything except maybe value investing is, like, completely unpredictable, but you'll explain that to me in a bit. I wanna continue along this like career timeline because I'm one thing that really jumped out at me is you've spoken about selling your hedge fund. Would that be a way to frame it? Like
Yeah.
you sold it ultimately. And we spoke a little bit about this offline, but I've been reading the book The Fund, which is about Bridgewater and about Ray Dalio. And that was the first time that I'd really thought about how maybe difficult or odd it is to sell a hedge fund when it's often like very connected to a particular individual. Like Ray, even Bridgewater being as big and notorious as it was, like there was a bit of a slog for him to be able to exit that because there's such a tie with Bridgewater and Ray Dalio. And so I'm just curious, like, how you think about the hedge fund system in general, like the business being able to exit it, and maybe what was unique about your fund that it's able to have this life cycle even when you're not the owner anymore.
Well, the hedge fund industry has changed hugely since I
Mm,
started out because I started working at a hedge fund in 2001. I worked for a guy called Victor Niederhofer in Connecticut, who is quite a famous quant trader. And when I worked there in the late 90s, early 2000s, hedge funds were much, much smaller than they are today. Like the
mm,
essential idea with a hedge fund was that you take someone who's a very good asset manager, and instead of them sort of landing at Fidelity and running, a multi-billion-dollar portfolio, they would run a smaller, much more aggressive portfolio that they charge higher fees on. And they're able to do things that you can't do at Fidelity. Like you're able to use derivatives, you're able to go long or short stocks, things like that. And at the time, I remember, like in Connecticut, which would have been hedge fund central at the time and still to this day, you wouldn't, if you went out and you met people and they said, "What do you do for a living?" You would never really say, "I work for a hedge fund," because no one knew what that meant. You'd sort
okay.
of say, "I work for a boutique asset manager," or something like that. And so what happened was when the dot-com bubble burst, the stock market fell for 3 years in a row. And a bunch of these hedge fund guys, these, small aggressive traders in places like Connecticut and London and whatever, were making money. And people kind of looked at it and they said, wait, the stock market fell for 3 years. And there's a bunch of people who made money for 3 years. What are they doing? And then
Can I
the
pause?
industry just exploded.
Well, I was gonna say, can I pause? I had this aha moment. This is gonna sound so stupid, and you'll tell me if this is stupid or not. A hedge fund, like you're hedging against potential events, including downturning events, and therefore hedge funds were gonna perform. Like I'd never put together the idea of a hedge fund and tied it to like the actual concept of hedging, but I
Well
was
well,
sort of
that
having that.
that's where the name comes from, like
Yeah,
this idea of hedging. It's not really how the very kind of the guy who gave the industry that name did do that, where he went
yeah,
basically picked his favorite stocks to buy and picked the worst ones to sell short, and his idea was that he would give you the returns of his stock picking ability without you being exposed to the risk of the stock market. So that was the original idea of a
concept.
hedge fund, but it kind of moved on from there,
Yeah,
where it really just means in fact, it kind of just means boutique asset manager. But what's interesting is if you look at the returns of hedge funds compared to the stock market, there was up until around 2003, there was no relationship. And when the industry got really big and suddenly people were raising billions and tens of billions, you started to see that the returns of hedge funds became roughly like a muted version of the stock market. And the reason for that was just that there was so much money thrown at them that if, there's trading strategies you can do with, we'll say, 300, $500 million that when you've got $20 billion, you can't really do. And you just end up one way or another being kind of long the stock market.
let me ask you, because you've interviewed Rob Copeland, who wrote this book, The Fund, that I've referenced a few times, and
Yep.
and I'm halfway through your interview with him. I haven't finished it though. Like, I'm curious, what is your perspective at this point on Ray Dalio? How much of him or Bridgewater's success do you ascribe to him or some intelligence or oracle nature ability to understand the markets or whatever? And how much do you attribute to luck? Because I felt like The Fund really chalks a lot of it up to getting lucky, the book that is, maybe more so than you even felt, and I'm curious what your perspective is at this point.
I That's a question that I struggle with just because even I approach things always with this sort of statistical perspective. That's what being a quant is sort
Yeah.
of statistics. And so even stepping away from Ray Dalio, one of the reasons that it even took me quite a while to launch my own fund was that it took ages for me to decide whether, because I had good performance for quite a while, but how do you know if you're lucky or if you're smart, right? And that's always, the truth is, that's a really difficult question for anyone because, you know, basically, in order to have a long enough track record where you can say this thing is definitely statistically proven to be better than owning the stock market, that's almost someone's entire career, you know? So, I don't really want to necessarily opine on whether Ray Dalio
Sure.
is a good asset manager or not. But I would say that about almost anyone. Like there's sort of this funny thing where people look at someone who has a few years of good performance and they go, this person's a genius. And I know that I've always looked at myself and asked, like, am I smart or am I lucky? I can't properly answer that question for myself. So I definitely can't answer it for someone else.
Well, for a year and a half, I was a brilliant NFT trader, and then I was the worst NFT trader of all time.
Huh.
Do you think that quant trading and perhaps like all trading has just gotten tremendously harder because it's gotten so much more competitive? And the further framing I'll give to that is I think Charlie Munger has talked about this. He's like, it was so much easier to find the right value investing deals, like the companies to invest in when Charlie and I first started out. Partly they're so much bigger now, so it takes so much more scale to move the needle for them. But partly more people have learned from them with the internet and social media. People are just getting smarter in some ways, and so there's more competition competing away the gains.
There's sort of two sides to that because like my old boss Victor started doing this type of thing in the 1960s, and he was able to do this because he was at the University of Chicago and had access to computers when no one had access to computers,
Mm.
and he had access to data when no one had access to data, so he was able to find all of this stuff. So you could kind of argue that it was easier then, except that it wasn't, because you also had to be the unusual person who knew how to use a computer and who knew how to manipulate data. And it's sort of like looking at science and saying, gosh, it was easy for Isaac Newton, nothing had been discovered. You
Yeah.
could point out, Hooke's
All this
law,
blue
look, a
skin.
spring stretches back. It's very easy for us to look at stuff that has been discovered
Mm.
and say that it's easy. Nowadays, it might be finding the trades might be more difficult because other people might have already found the sort of low hanging fruit, but we have tools that are way beyond what people had 20, 30 years ago. So there's two sides of it.
What do you make of the more modern phenomenon, especially I would say of like the millennial and younger generation, that is the GameStop, the NFT, the crypto, the fueling all of that, which seems to be some percentage of actual like thoughtfulness and skill. Like I think about the GameStop thing. There was some real thinking for some part of that group that said, "Oh my gosh, they've over shorted this stock. We could actually pull off a short squeeze." And there was some intelligent analysis that happened there. But
Mm.
then a lot of also just the Reddit swarming. Do you think that this is here to stay? Do you think it's interesting? Do you think it's just a new form of gambling? Obviously you talk about these kinds of phenomena a lot in your video and crypto and these scams, but like I'm curious what you think of all that.
Well, it's interesting because this type of thing has been around forever, like hype and people following hype and whatever. The thing that's reasonably new, and I mean new over the last 20, 25 years, is the internet bubbles that people can get into, because the people who got all excited about the meme stocks and whatever, the problem is that it's almost turned into a religion at this point, like they really, whatever
Make you an
early
army.
arguments there were around, these stocks don't exist anymore. They have this, I don't know, made up enemy where they believe there's hedge funds out there shorting a stock that is hugely, like they're like, why is it being kept down? And it's like, it's not
It's
being
not
kept down. It's
valuable.
way more valuable than any other mall-based retailer of objects that are easier to buy on Amazon. And I think there is slightly a problem. Well, I don't know if it's a problem, but it's just a new thing where, years ago, if you had a quirky thing that you were interested in, you didn't necessarily meet other people with that interest. Well, today, I don't know, if you want to like come up with the maddest hobby in the world, a quick Google and you'll find a community of people doing the same thing, you know? So I think people find communities quicker today. But even that was, I would say, you know, you go back to the dot-com bubble, there were all these stock market chat rooms filled with traders, and they were all talking about the latest dot-com stocks and even pumping and dumping them a bit. They would you know, come up with a scheme to, you know, say positive things about the stock in a Yahoo message board and pump it up, you know, and they'd have bought it. And they'd, you know, it's
Right.
the, you know, I imagine if you go back to the old railroad stock bubbles, you know, there'll have been people gathering in a corner of Wall Street, you know, whispering made up rumors about a railroad stock in order to get it moving. You know, I've heard Rockefellers investing, you know.
And your argument, it sounds like, is like the scale is just bigger now because we're able to congregate in groups at a scale, given the internet, that wasn't possible
Yeah, and
previously. The
even like
dynamic, the
people
phenomenon
from
is the
various
same.
parts of the world, like you don't have to sit on that corner in Wall Street to hear the rumor anymore, you
Right.
know, but
Let me ask you this. What do you think of this? Is a very specific case. So, I imagine you may not want to comment on it, but it's indicative of this broader question that I think is interesting and that we have to grapple with now, which is like taking Ryan Cohen as an example. He posted a smiling moon emoji in the comment of a Bed Bath and Beyond news story, and on the back of that, you have the run up in this stock that he then ends up selling into that run up, and now you have all these investors saying they pump and dumped on him. And what do you think of this new world where you have these meme lord figures who can make a low key comment on the internet and it actually drives price action? Should anything be done about that, or do people just need to
it's
wisen up
funny
and let the moon
because
emoji mean
I'm
something?
always on the fence about this stuff because slightly I sort of feel, you know, I know the SEC are sort of there to protect regular investors, but I kind of feel that if you're dumb enough to buy a stock because someone like, you know, kind of like these fellas who like pile into Dogecoin because they feel that Elon tweeted about it. I kind of feel that, you know, to stand there in a court of law and sort of say, I was misled by this rocket Dogecoin moon emoji combination, like I kind of feel like there's a bit of a fool and his money problem going on here as well.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. But there's a line, right? Like if Ryan Cohen had gone on Twitter and been like, I can't say more than this, but we're working on some really interesting things behind the scenes at Bed Bath and Beyond, and I'm so excited about it. Like, obviously that's now different, right? Like if he's really in a more explicit way.
Actually, I think like sort of emoji-based pump and dump schemes are like driven by the fact that you're able to claim that what you
Mhm,
said didn't mean what people
mhm.
interpreted it as, you know? And equally, of course, like from a regulatory perspective, because I feel I'm trying to remember, like there recently I remember looking at like there is an SEC case, I think, that brought up rocket moon emojis as a form of, you know, investment advice. But I kind of get how they're maybe, you know, trying to crack down on this stuff, but it is sort of such cryptic language, and it's also just so dumb like that. Like, I struggle to care about it, you know, like I kind of, because I do feel bad if someone is specifically misled. An old time pump and dump scheme where an old lady gets a phone call and is
Yes.
told, you know, to put her life savings in a penny stock, and she does this and is ripped off. And I kind of feel, you know, people need to come down on this, but I slightly feel like that if there's a dummy on Twitter who bought a thing because of emojis, like I feel they were probably gonna lose their money one way or another.
They were
Like
gonna find another way to. Yeah, well, I think there was a rocket moon situation there's a lawsuit against Flow and or Dapper Labs and or Top Shot. I don't know if you followed that whole movement, but
no.
anyway, I tend to believe that people are smarter than people think. So I think a lot of folks who are I'm going to use this term loosely because I think investing is a generous term for what people are doing at this point, but investing their money on the basis of that kind of thing, I think a lot of them realize on some level that it is gambling a bit, right? And
Yeah,
that this
well, that's
isn't
kind of the thing is that, there is a difference between investing and gambling. And I think I agree with you. I think a lot, like if you're buying something based on rocket and moon emojis or any other emoji combinations, that is, let's be serious here. Like you can only be so upset because it's sort of like saying, I'm suing my friend because he told me his lucky numbers and I played them in the lottery and didn't
right,
win. Like you can't, you weren't given what seemed like trustworthy information from a source that seemed believable and misled. Like you did a dumb thing with your money, and people do that, and it's your money. You're allowed to do dumb
right.
things with it.
Do you think so you said this thing, you said there is a line between gambling and investing, and I agree with that. I also, as this sort of become the theme almost of this conversation, that line is finer than I think I even previously realized. Because I think a lot of even investing, even if you are, like we're talking about, looking at historical data, looking at there's so many factors that go into the movement and price movements of stocks and this and that everyone's sort of guessing. And the question is, how intelligent is your guesswork? And that's what this
Well,
line.
obviously, no one can really know the answer, right? Because if one person knew the answer, they would get all of the money. And the problem with one person getting all of the money is that then we'd kind of go, well, one person has all the money. Let's write off the money and start again with a new means of exchange,
Mm,
you can't have perfect knowledge. Like the world wouldn't work if one person had perfect knowledge. So we're always we're trying to make smart decisions in an uncertain world. And that's basically kind of what drew me to statistics. Is statistics is a way, it sort of helps you to test your ideas a little bit.
mm. So do you think this is maybe maybe it's a stupid question, like, I can real, like, investment happen in crypto, in your opinion? Or is there not enough historical evidence to point to, like, where would you put any amount of putting money in crypto on the investing scale?
I don't really see. There's probably things in there that sort of are investment. Like even, for example, if you build some sort of Bitcoin mining rig or whatever, crypto mining rig that you don't believe in necessarily in the crypto, but you believe that should it hold a value, there's an investment that can be made. We'll say, for example, if you open a brokerage firm for crypto, like you're basically buying and selling a thing, and the money you spend on building that exchange or whatever is an investment with an expected return. But in terms of like buying the various coins or tokens or whatever they are with the idea that they have an expected drift over time, there's no reason to believe that. And that doesn't just hold to crypto either. Like the same
Right.
thing can be said for commodities, right? Like no one would say to you that you should buy, a thing that's price moves is like corn, for example. And no one would say that you should roll a long position in corn futures for the next 40 years in order to fund your retirement, because people would say, well, what is the fundamental reason that would drive up why would corn be more valuable in the future than today? And so similarly with crypto, like with a stock, there is a business there, and the business is basically interfacing with customers to provide either a product or a service. You provide something at a price where you make a profit, and that profit goes to the owners of the business, which are the shareholders. With crypto, there's not a thing happening that generates money, and in fact, there's a thing happening that destroys money in that it's expensive to run, right? So if we compare, like, we'll say, for example, there were people who were saying that, and it doesn't matter which crypto, but we'll pick Bitcoin just to drive people in the comment section insane. And you don't have to write in crypto and Bitcoin are different. They're not. But anyhow, That's my comments are always filled with that. But no one ever says why they're different. They just say that they are. But we'll say, for example, something like Bitcoin, right? And gold. Are they the same? Well, the answer is that you can take a gold coin and you can bury it somewhere. And because it sort of doesn't rust or degrade really over time, someone in 10,000 years could dig it up and there's a gold coin sitting right there. While with crypto or with Bitcoin, there's this mining process which costs money. You've got to run all of these computers, they do all of this stuff, and that costs money. And so for a Bitcoin to be around in 1,000 years, an awful lot of stuff has to happen, while nothing has to happen for a piece of gold to be
Mm.
around in 1,000 years.
I mean, that is a more interesting argument. I usually laugh at people who try and act like gold inherently is clearly more valuable than Bitcoin or makes more sense than Bitcoin. Because usually the arguments I hear is like, well, it's useful in terms of jewelry and it's useful in terms of like being a conductor of in engineering. And I'm like, that's not what we base the price of gold
No,
on. Like, to be clear.
there's a very
Like,
good, there's an article from around 10 or 15 years ago by a guy named Willem Boyder, where he describes gold as like the, I don't know, 2,000-year-old bubble,
consensual
because,
hallucination. Yeah, I mean, in
yeah,
some ways, that's what, and this is where these
but
fine
it does
lines.
at least have a use, and it also doesn't have a store. Because even why do people use precious metals? Like, well, why did they pick things like platinum and gold as real stores of value? And the answer is that they don't really degrade over time. Like,
Right,
you wouldn't use steel because it rusts.
right.
You wouldn't, in fact, in Sweden, a couple of 100 years ago, they used to use copper as money. And they had these massive big plates of copper. Like, you should Google it. It's quite hilarious. Like, some sort of 500 pounds weight of copper that would have held a value. And so the reason that people used gold as currency is quite simply that it doesn't degrade very much over time, and that it's small and scarce enough to be valuable.
I also wanna I hear that, but I wanna push back because on the Ethereum side, I mean, you do have revenue generated in the form of fees. I mean, you stake the Ethereum to secure the network, and then fees are paid when people exchange on and use the network. So there is this bet on the future value of the network and people both needing Ethereum to transact to a degree on the network and then paying out these fees when they do, and people who are staking to secure the network receiving those fees, and then Ethereum gets burned. So I think it's more complicated. I think there's more to it than I think
No, there's
oftentimes
much
people who like to
more
shit
in
on
there.
it.
Like, I obviously picked a sort of simple example to make
Yeah.
a simple point. But there are many things, like actually a lot of, like, I've done videos on my channel on, oddly, because of all of the questions that were raised by crypto, I found myself digging into the history of sort of money in
Money.
general. And you can compare like a proof of work idea to, now I can't think of the name of it, but the polished beads that in, what's it called? Wampum.
Wampum
So
beads, something like that?
wampum is sort of proof of work, right? In
Mm.
that I think it took like maybe a day for a craftsman to sort of take a quahog shell and turn it into a bead. And that worked as a form of money, right? The interesting thing is all sorts of things throughout history have worked as a form of money. Gold worked as a form of money. Wampum worked as a form of money until people worked out how to mass produce it. But there's many things that can work as a form of money. And equally, there are things that can collapse. This is my $100 trillion Zimbabwean banknote. And
Just a throw
so,
of what could
mm,
happen.
well, it's actually just that I feel like if ever anyone wants to flex around me, I have $100 trillion just sitting on my desk, and I don't even care. I'm not, look, don't care.
Sitting here willing to talk with me as
Yeah.
you sit there 100 trillionaire, you'll
Yeah, like when people say, "Oh, Jeff Bezos, he's wealthy," and you're like, "Does he have $100 trillion?" I don't think so.
how did you get that?
eBay.
There was effort exerted to be able to make this point. That's really funny. Um, yeah, I think for me, and I don't wanna be like people are hate crypto so much, and look, I get it, and I see all the scams, and I find a lot of it so ridiculous as somebody who has been surrounded by it for the last year and a half. But I also think people sometimes underappreciate how much nothing matters. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
I
Nothing in the real
do.
economy
No,
is
I
real.
mean,
Investing is
that's
this
kind of
very weird
my
line.
point even about we can pick anything as a form of money, and as long as we all there's a very interesting story. There's John Law was kind of the first guy who in Europe came up with the idea of paper money, and at first he
Mm,
was going to base it on land, that basically if you owned land, you would get sort of money that sort of said it was ownership of land and people could exchange it. Eventually, they just went with kind of a purely fiat system. But no, I think originally I actually forget. It's a long time since I've studied up on this. But there's a very interesting thing because when we had an economy that was kind of based on gold and silver coinage, there were often big problems in many countries where there wouldn't be enough gold or silver to do the transactions that needed to be done, and the economies would grind to a halt. Where if we didn't have a means of exchange, transactions wouldn't occur. And so an interesting thing happened when paper money was brought about in France. The French economy boomed. All sorts of bridges were built, buildings went up, all sorts of things happened because people were able to pay each other to do
yeah.
stuff. And so there's kind of an interesting thing where, that turned into a big bubble and burst, a Mississippi bubble, but which was also tied to stocks. But anyhow, the the course thing that's interesting there is that an ability to work and to sort of store somehow the value of the work we did yesterday for when we need something in the future is very valuable, and good money is able to allow us to do that.
Mhm. Do you think the study of history is, like, the most important thing maybe anyone can embark on for, like, professional success? Maybe just hold it to investing, but I think it would actually apply beyond that.
Well, yeah, I think it's funny. I just think reading in general is a very good thing. It's funny. One of the things that shocked me and made me really question the intelligence of Sam Bankman-Fried was the fact that he said that he never read anything, and I
Yeah.
thought I've never really met a smart person who doesn't read, because reading is the quickest way you can grow your mind, like you can add ideas. And so I think I've always loved, I like nonfiction books just because I like learning about how the good decision making of other people, history and, biographies, autobiographies, all that sort of thing, but also nonfiction novels that they can just really grow your mind and cause you to think about things that you might not normally think about. So I think, yeah, that sort of studying history, reading, learning, it's really important. There's no faster way of increasing your almost. It's not really experience, but it feels a lot like experience if you've gone through the ideas of some of the great minds that are around who write
Mhm,
down their great ideas.
mhm. Are you a morning person?
Um, I get up in the morning, but No,
Good,
I
good start.
find no, I find that I want to do stuff in the morning, but I find that I get most productive late into the evening. So
Oh,
I
that is
often
so
find myself
lovely to hear.
like really working like my hardest work sort of 6 p.m. till midnight kind of thing.
Wow, I that makes me so happy because I'm like, my quest in this life is to prove that I'm not worthless simply because I absolutely hate mornings and I don't function well in the mornings and I can't think in the morning and my best work is always more in the evenings. And I feel like we're inundated with just information about how like successful smart people read and then wake up at like 5 a.m. and get their day done.
Well,
It's
it's funny.
something
I slightly think that maybe the reason I do my best work towards the end of the day is that as the day goes on, I feel guiltier and guiltier about having squandered so much of the day. And it's like, well, I have to get something back. Like I cannot go to bed having been so
accomplished
unproductive.
nothing. I relate to that. So let me ask you as I would love to just close out here talking a bit about your journey to teaching and then YouTube, and I'm sure there's others, but certainly selfishly, I'd love to pick your brain a little bit on YouTube. You when did you start teaching in the trajectory of this career, and why did you decide you wanted to start teaching?
I started teaching in 2009, and it was really just that I was asked to give a one off guest lecture at a university. And I went and gave the lecture, and the students kind of liked it. And a friend of mine taught at the university already, and they said, will you come back? And at first, I did non-graded courses, which, to be
Right.
honest, they're the most fun to teach because the students aren't sort of panicking about an exam; they just want to draw in information. And so, I like it a lot. I like interacting with the students. I meet so many smart people. Like I kind of view it very selfishly. Like I enjoy it. I enjoy the people I meet. It also keeps me really up to date because I can't sort of stand in front of a class and tell them, give them an example from 1985. You've got to, the students will ask you new questions, even like, why do I know a bit and have stuff to say about crypto? It's like, well, for the last kind of 5, 6 years, students turn up and they say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And I have to go away and read up on it and answer their question. So I love teaching because I learn maybe more than the students do from teaching.
And then I know that you started on YouTube because you were teaching. You were posting videos as a way to give the material to your students to rewatch, to understand about derivatives or whatever else was the
Yeah.
case. When did you start thinking about it as, and actually, I'm curious what you think about it as it now. I was going to use the phrase like side hustle of some sort, but I imagine that maybe would not resonate for you in terms of how you think about it. Like, how do you think about your YouTube career at this point and your podcast career? And
I kind of just find it a ton of fun. I've set a goal for myself to put up a video a week, or at least sometimes I've done more than a video a week, but that's my goal, is to always put up a video a week. And once again, it keeps me thinking. I'm looking for interesting things. I'm trying to sort of come up with actually an interesting thing in terms of not getting too bogged down in because I think sometimes there's people and they do YouTube, they find a thing that works and they just want to repeat it. And I think eventually maybe even their audience get tired of it because it becomes repetitive. And my idea with YouTube is just to put up stuff that I find interesting. I used to think, what would my audience find interesting? But now I just think, well, if I find something interesting
mm,
enough, there'll be other people out there like who find it interesting. So I don't want to like research or study up on or, create a video on a topic that I'm not interested in because I think someone else will be. I just find stuff that like really that I go, wow, that's an interesting thing. I'll tell the people about it. And so that's kind of my approach.
do you think that would have always worked? Like, do you think if you'd started out from the get-go just following your curiosity, it would have always worked? Or do you think that you can do that now, having established yourself and built an audience who will follow you wherever you wanna go?
It's so hard to say. Like YouTube, once again, the way we talked about the stock market being random, like YouTube's really random as well. In terms of which videos really hit, sometimes it really surprises me. One video will be huge, another will be a flop. And I never necessarily like there's some of my videos that are my favorite videos that get terrible views. And there's other videos that I kind of go like, gosh, that one wasn't very like that. Actually, a video that I did, I think it was a very interesting video. It was on the topic of blitzscaling, this
Mm,
modern Silicon Valley thing of like dumping money at a money losing business and making it big
yeah.
and profiting off of the stock, but the business never becomes profitable. I made a video on that topic, and it was kind of when I was, I forget, I like used an iPhone on a stand in the university, sitting on a couch. The camera would not focus on me. The sound is terrible. Like it technically like one of the worst looking videos I've ever made, and it got massive views. And then there's other ones, and I kind of, because when you make these videos, you kind of go like, oh, do I need a better microphone? Do I need a
Yeah.
better camera? Should I change the lights? Like you think that all of these things move the needle, but actually it just sort of has to be interesting. And then there's also just how whatever the YouTube algorithm is, like sometimes it sort of gets behind it. Sometimes you have a video, it's doing really well and it just dies. And it's not understandable as to what works. So
Yeah.
so I think even worst case scenario, if no one watches it, you made something that you find really interesting, you've learned something from it, and maybe that's good enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, it's interesting. I think about somebody like a Mr. Beast, who's obviously this is a very professional thing for him. And he talks about how, and I've heard other YouTubers talk about this, thumbnail and title are the most important thing. They plan that before they even plan the video. Have you made that shift, or like how much do you think about title and thumbnail when you're putting together an episode?
Not much at all, and it's probably one of the weakest things about my channel. Like, often I'll be uploading the video and I'll just kind of bang something in it, like I picked a large font that I feel works for me. I make my video thumbnails in PowerPoint just because I move quickly. And like, if I want to put a person in the thumbnail, there's a website called remove.bg. Remove
Yeah,
background.
yeah. Well,
And it gives
Canva's
you
good for
like
that.
a really low resolution, remove background image of the person. And I'm like, that'll do.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's sort of a 30-second thing.
I think that's so interesting because you do have a big audience. You get really good views on your videos, and it's a good reminder that there's never just one answer. I do think that the thumbnail and title thing has become a bigger thing, partly because Mr. Beast has spoken about it a bunch. But then
I,
again, like I
I
said, a
think
lot
if
of
people
YouTubers talk
want
about
to be really, really professional with YouTube, I think that's a thing. But like, one of the people who inspires me on YouTube is, have you seen Tom Scott's channel at all?
oh, it sounds familiar, but I'm definitely not like a regular.
He's kind of a really big YouTuber, but
Yeah,
one of the people who started out really early on. And I kind of love that his thumbnails are often just like a bad photo of him like standing in a field, and it'll say like, "This is an interesting thing about electrical power wires," or something. And he'll get 2 million views on it.
I
And
mean,
I think the reason his videos work is that they're always interesting, right? So he doesn't need to trick you. You just need to go, oh, it's a Tom Scott video. It'll be good. And so I'm more inspired by people like that, where I think that if you put out content that is of reasonable quality, hopefully you'll build up a bit of a reputation and people will watch it, not because of the sort of, because even I've thought of using those AI things to generate like thumbnails and whatever, but then I'd have to Discord. I don't like it.
yeah, I totally get it. As somebody who's earlier in this journey, I just don't know if there becomes a turning point where the world is so saturated with content that, yeah, there's a certain cohort of people who are like grandfathered in, or something has happened where that cohort can get away now with like the lower effort thumbnails. And but if
You
you're
know,
trying to
it's
gain traction,
kind
if you're
of, there is
required to
some
like,
truth to that, I think, but equally, you'll look at, there are some YouTube channels that were huge, and you go back and look at them, and they'll upload a video and get 10,000 views on it. And you're
yeah,
like, well, they've somehow lost their audience. And I don't think they'll still have the same thumbnails, but they've lost their audience. And I think it's, if you put up stuff that doesn't pay off for your audience, like if they start watching it and then they're like, no, this isn't what I wanted, or I don't like this guy, or there's something like really wrong with the content. But I think if something is inherently interesting, the thing is that there's so many viewers out there that, like, my goal would never to be Mr. Beast. Like, I don't put up content that will appeal to like 10 million people, but will it appeal to 150, 200,000 people? Probably, right? Because there's enough people out there. And that's kind of good enough.
when and how did you start thinking about it a little bit as a business? I know you have sponsors on most of your videos, I would say. And like, is that folks approaching you as your channel was growing? Or did you think, hey, like maybe I should do something more with this now that I have action?
They all pretty much came to me. And early on, I, I took a long time to take sponsors because
Mm,
often like the emails that come in are just awful. Like, they're 90% of the stuff you get emailed is stuff that you would never want to
promote.
pitch to your audience. And I think you shouldn't pitch stuff that, if you think it's garbage,
Yeah.
don't tell people it's good, because once again, that's a good way of losing your audience, is if someone goes out and like buys some awful junk that you told them was great because you were paid to. But right now I just have someone who screens them all for me, and she knows what I like and what I don't like. So
Mm.
I almost like, she'll go through everything. And, recently I've had like Ground News as a sponsor, and I tried it out and I quite like it. And so then I'm happy to tell people about it. But sometimes there's just, even the things like Masterworks, like I'm sure you get like a 10, I hope, do you do Masterworks or no?
I don't.
Okay,
I
thank
have
God.
been approached.
Yeah, I mean, you get like 5 emails a day from Masterworks, but I can't pitch that because it's not a good product, right? Like I am telling people about kind of investment decision making, and then they want you to say that partial ownership in a painting will give you the same returns that the stock market will give you. And I don't believe that to be true, in that that's not the returns of the art market in general. And also, I don't take sponsors who pitch investments at all, because I think that it's kind of like if
Yeah,
people view me as an expert in investing and then I tell them you should invest in this thing, it's quite reasonable that they would take that as mm, something that they should do. And
yeah.
I can't tell people what to invest in. Like, even apart from any legalities or anything like that, I don't believe that that's how you should invest. You shouldn't buy a thing that a guy on the internet, you shouldn't put your savings into a thing a guy on the internet said was good. And so, things like that, I don't take Masterwork because I don't believe in their product, but also because even if I did, I wouldn't
Right.
pitch. I've been approached by brokerage firms. I don't take them either because I don't know. I just think it's not really a good spot to be in.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And, just to tie this all together and like this is where to bring us back to Ryan Cohen posting a moon emoji or a like at least the cart is full. My mixed feelings come in because I'm like, okay, nobody should invest on the basis of that. And anybody
Mm.
who does has to accept that they might lose money. On the other hand, Ryan Cohen should know by this point that if he posts something like that, that might move a market. And I do think people should be thoughtful and responsible in this era that we live in, this world that we
Well,
live in
I
with
I
the internet.
agree. I think it's sort of maybe irresponsible and not very caring for your audience members, that you're happy for them to lose and you to win. Like, you can make a very similar argument. You turn on CNBC and you'll have a crazy guy there telling you, what's that, like Jim Cramer's
Jim
lightning
Cramer.
round, and someone just names a stock and he says buy or sell,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
with no, like, are we supposed to believe that he has sat down and analyzed the, 1,000 stocks out there and knows off the top of his head the details of them? Like, that doesn't strike me as awfully responsible either, but that seems to be acceptable. So I don't think it's right to sort of abuse your audience in that manner. Like, I think if you research something, you can tell people, I've done this analysis or I've read
Right.
up on this and this is what I think. I don't think you should ever even hint at them that they should buy or sell securities. Like, because, there's sort of that thing where people go, well, I'm putting all my money into it, but, do your own research. And it's like, what are you doing here? I don't like that, but I wouldn't want to do it. Like, I would feel, I do think, as when you speak publicly, whether you're legally responsible for what you say, you are kind of morally responsible for your behavior, and you should. I don't know. Your audience are watching you; they like you. You're receiving ad revenue from YouTube because they're watching your videos. Like, maybe you don't need to sort of abuse their trust.
Yeah. Last question, also on your content and you're thinking about it all. I'm curious, like, how would you describe your evolution as a creator? And the framing I'll give to this is I've noticed it a couple times, but your recent video, I think on Twitter and on Elon, I really noticed it, which is you ended the video. And obviously, folks, I'm assuming a lot of people who are watching this are familiar with your style, but you're very dry. You sneak these jokes in a way where it's in the same tone as everything else. So, you blink and you'll miss it kind of a thing. And you ended the video with, well, if Elon does this, that, or the other thing, he can end up owning 50% of the banking industry or whatever, which was a callback to the comments that Elon has made about how he wants Twitter to become, or, X to become like a
50% of the
payment.
global financial system, a
There you go.
humble
That's
goal.
it. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this, but my point being, it struck me as having the structure of a comedy routine, obviously, again, you make actual jokes in it that are kind of funny, but that ending to a callback to something that's like earlier in the video, that's usually what you see in like a comedy, in a stand-up set, is somebody will end it with a reference to something that happened earlier. And I'm wondering if any of that is conscious, if you've evolved and thought about how the structure of storytelling or being funny like works, or if it's just sort of an intuitive thing that you've started to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because some of my videos, like they'll be filled with jokes, and then there's other videos that are kind of dead serious, and I think
Mhm.
that might sometimes confuse new viewers because they might have watched a video that they find funny, and then a week later there's one on like the economy of Turkey that's like dead serious all the way through, and I think there's things that you can joke about. Like, actually, an example was a year or so ago, I did one on Egypt, and Egypt was, in a rather desperate financial situation. And there's nothing really funny there. And it's wrong to make jokes in that context.
Yeah,
While like Elon Musk is just always funny because he's always doing stuff. There's
right.
always, there's just so many funny stories that's easy to joke about. But in terms of like, do I put much thought into the structure of the jokes? Not really. I often just sort of tell the story to a certain extent the way I would tell a friend. And there's like little jokes in there like you might make with a friend. So.
Yeah. Okay, I said that was gonna be the last question, but I have one more if you'll permit me. I know we're going long, which is, how do you do your research? Like, do you have particular sources you typically tend to go to? Is it just like canvas the internet? What's your
Well,
process?
I read an awful lot of news, like, and I'm just sort of constantly, reading financial news just because I find it interesting. There's also economists that I find really interesting. On top of that, like a
What are the
lot of my
economists you
friends.
follow?
Yeah, gosh, let me think. There's a guy called Brad Setzer who's awfully interesting. There's Michael Pettis is just the expert on China. People like that I just really, I kind of read all of their stuff and I find them really interesting. And then I just have friends like my friend, I have a good friend, Manoj Pradhan, who's a really good economist. But, I'll be hanging out with him on the weekend and we talk about markets. And because I went to business school, a lot of my friends are people I went to university with and whatever. And so they're all in the financial industry. So in a funny way, some of it is just from like conversations I have with friends or new ideas that I think are interesting. But yeah, it's mostly just driven by what I find interesting
Mhm.
myself.
And you still do trading. You don't own the hedge fund anymore, but you still do trading for yourself.
Yeah,
So
that's just like my personal savings, that I still, run an investment strategy with.
but I imagine that keeps you curious about certain things as well. You're like, "Oh, I have this question that I'm grappling with for."
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's even the thing. It's funny. The other one of the finance creators that I really like is the Plain Bagel,
Yes.
Richard Coffin. He's a Canadian guy, and he worked in the financial industry in Canada. And it's an interesting thing because when I first met him, like probably a couple of years ago, we talked a bit about YouTube and work. And it's interesting because I think the reason he's able to put out such high quality content is because he actually is in the weeds of doing the real work at a firm. And I almost think someone like him, it's kind of great that he's not a full-time YouTuber
Yeah.
because if he was a full-time YouTuber, he wouldn't be doing all of that background work that he just has to do for his actual job. And instead, he'd just be banging out stuff that would get clicks. And I think the reason he's so good is because of that sort of relate. And there's another guy who runs the How Money Works channel, and he's
Yeah.
a former investment banker.
And you have the piece we were talking about earlier, which is if you're not 100% reliant on this on money, the odds are higher that you're not gonna fall down some trap that maybe maximizes views but isn't high integrity. And I think that's really great too if you have sources of income outside of just
Yeah,
media.
it's very interesting because even at the moment, like, I get right now quite a lot of views on my YouTube channel, but I often, as I've said to you, I see channels that just dry up like they used to be huge and now they're getting no views at all. And that could easily happen. And I would be sad if that happened because I enjoy dealing with this big community of people who watch my videos. But equally, I could live with that,
Right.
like it's not.
All your eggs in life aren't in this basket, and,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Something I think about as I'm full-time now doing media stuff. I've obviously done other things, number of different other things in my past, and I'm like, "Oh," like, I actually really see the value in media being like a part-time thing for folks. I don't
Well,
know.
it's especially, I think, YouTube type media, like, because, often I look at like some really good journalists. It baffles me the way they're able to like write an article a day. I don't know how you could do that sort of level of output. I'm not able to do that. But, obviously for them, it is a full time job and they do an amazing job. But even, you speak to Z in researching his book, which was tied to just writing the pieces he writes for Bloomberg. I mean, he'll travel to the places, he'll
Yeah,
he'll meet with people, he'll do all of this stuff. Someone like me, I couldn't justify
right.
that. Like if someone said to me, do you want to travel to a place to meet someone who's doing a thing? I'd be like, well, can I jump on a Zoom call with them? Which isn't as good,
Yeah,
but like the truth is there's a big difference between like a
yes.
YouTube journalist and an
And a
actual
proper
journalist,
journal.
so.
Though again, as is the theme of this episode, that line is tricky. I covered the SBF trial, and I would see pieces that would come out of institutions, and I'd be like, "Wrong, wrong, wrong." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He'd be like, "Ah, like this is," people.
Well, no, sometimes that stuff can be really lazy. Like, I think, you're friends with Tiffany Fong, and I think she did an amazing job reporting on that. But even just the information she gathered on what was going on was stuff that a lot of real journalists weren't able to gather. And, I don't know, like, yeah, it's I guess the media world is just changing quite a lot, but
People are
there's
people.
room for all of these things.
Totally. You've got good people who do amazing work within institutions who are benefited and bolstered by the fact that they have that institution behind them. And then you have
Mm,
independent people who are able to have more flexibility. I mean, I've heard CoffeeZilla talk about this. Steven say, in some ways, there's an advantage to him doing the investigative work that he does, being an individual, because these institutions will get a little bit, they have resources they have to guard. Like they're afraid of being, of
yeah.
lawsuits and of these
No,
things where
because I
he was saying, like,
believe
as an
he spoke
individual.
with Netflix and
Really?
he said, "Oh, yeah, I can do sort of a fake guru busting show on Netflix." And they're like, "No, no, no, that'll get us sued," you know?
Yeah. That's fascinating, but exactly, and they have resources to actually protect, not to say that Steven is, like, broke or doesn't have resources, but it is very different, like, if a scammer's
No,
going
but he's
after
willing to take a
clicks.
risk that
Correct.
Netflix might not be willing to take, yeah.
Totally, because if you, and even if you're the scammer that's being outed, right, you're going, "Alright, Netflix has got a, these massive coffers, I'll be able to get a settlement of something, just to, because they want me to go away in a way where you're
It's
you're not gonna."
interesting 'cause, on the other hand, you would slightly think that Netflix probably also has the resources to hire a lawyer that'll grind you right up,
Yeah, well, but that's still
but
gonna cost them money, I think is the idea,
yeah.
right? That, they still are there's still an output there on their part where, presumably there's just, the lines are blurring for so many of these
Mm.
categories in the world today, and I find that fascinating, and I also I don't ever wanna get absolutist about it. I don't ever wanna pretend there's not a difference between Zeke Fox and the work he has done, and random YouTubers, that or a difference between real, serious, seasoned investors and people throwing money at shitcoins, but I often think, but I don't either wanna overly venerate,
No, but there's
the,
there's sort of
and
room in the world for all of this, and I
yeah,
I think viewers get something from watching both or from interacting with both, but equally even for people like me, how am I going to know? We'll say, for example, my recent video on Elon Musk, like, how would I know anything about the sort of the profits and losses within Twitter if Elon hadn't discussed that with a guy at
right.
the BBC? Or if how would I know that he's carried a bathroom sink in the front door of Twitter if, it wasn't published in the world's press, So even though we might do sort of independent reporting on news that kind of applies a different type of analysis, we do, of course, like if those big institutions who put that information out there weren't putting it out there, we'd have nothing to feed ourselves with.
Totally, you're leaning on that reporting. Let me ask, like, how much do you worry about getting things wrong? The Elon video is an interesting example because I also did a video on Elon, and I was trying to find some amount of truth or reconciliation or just consensus on how engagement at Twitter is doing, because it feels to me like you hear from the media world that engagement is down, and you cited some of these stats as well in terms of downloads
Yeah.
on the app being down, and you get some of that, but then you have Elon and Linda Yaccarino is seemingly saying the opposite, and I was going, I don't know, it just feels like with so many of these things you could go down a rabbit hole and go, well, okay, but numbers were a little bit up when Elon first took over, so if you're just looking year over year, like at this
Yeah.
time last
No, there
year,
was
yeah, things are
definitely,
artificially
but
high.
no one denies there was a pop. And in fact, I would argue that Twitter was at its most fun when Elon first took over, because it was kind of a madhouse for about a month or two.
On like web searches or like visits to the website, yeah, they're down a bit right now versus where they were a year ago. And I was doing this work probably, 3
Yeah.
weeks or whatever. But I'm going, okay, but I couldn't get further back than a year ago on the sites that I was using. And so suddenly I'm like, but I'm
Yeah.
looking at an artificially high number a year ago, trying to compare it now. Like, when do just say to like, you know what? Like, I've done enough. I've gotten enough information. This is true enough. And like, I
Well,
can go forward with it.
in cases like that, I sort of like to present both. Like I
Yeah.
presented, I think I played a clip of Linda
The
making one
numbers, the
claim. And
revenue
then,
numbers.
the truth is a lot of this data is out there and it needs to be out there, because how can Twitter sell adverts if like, it's important to Twitter that if app downloads rise, that it be out there. So they're going, that gets reported, like Google or, whoever runs the app stores knows how many downloads of the app occurred.
Right.
Advertising spend can be calculated, like it's,
Yeah.
and there's
And that's
agencies out
definitely
there who
down.
gather this info and report it. And so, you can only sort of hide this stuff so much, like a lot of the data's out there. But in cases like that, I do like to present both. Like actually, even the interesting thing was, the tweet that Elon put, I forget, he sort of said that's true, or I forget exactly what he
You
said
said the
at
actual
the end
truth.
of someone's tweet.
Yeah, you said the
And yeah, and I kind of think it's important to sort of put the tweet up on the screen and let people decide. I said a tweet that was viewed as anti-Semitic, because, I can't, there's people and they want to say Elon Musk is definitely
yeah,
anti-Semitic or Elon Musk is definitely not anti-Semitic. And the truth is, none of us can look in his heart and know how he feels about anything. And so, and I think we can all, even if you hate Elon Musk, you can put yourself in his shoes where like a tweet comes across and you sort of hit the retweet button. Then an hour later, one of your friends tells you, that guy was, it's a
the
war
head of
criminal or
the,
something. And you're
whatever,
like,
yeah.
oh, I did, I was moving fast. I hit the button. So I don't think, I think sometimes people want to make someone out to be a monster, want to make things out to be black and white. And the truth is that we don't really know with a lot of this stuff. And it doesn't hurt to just sort of say, look, there was a tweet that was viewed as anti-Semitic. In the conversation, Elon said it was the biggest mistake he had
Yes.
made in his time at Twitter or even on the platform.
Yeah.
And, I think you just put that forward. People still get angry. Like the comments fill up with people going, I can't believe you said that. And it's like, well,
Can't
you
believe you hate free
misinterpreted what I
speech,
said.
or
But
I can't
yeah,
believe you're apologizing, you're carrying water for the anti-Semite. You'll get both comments on the same video, I'm sure.
yeah.
Oh my
Well,
gosh.
the thing that's even interesting, like, because there's a group of people who want to look at Twitter and sort of say it's all about free speech, but actually, the internet is filled with places where you can say the most awful things that you want to, right? There's all these 4chan places. There's sites where you can, post your Al Qaeda beheading videos if you want to. Like,
Ugh.
you want,
Yeah.
there's the dark web. There's all sorts of speech on the internet. It just tends not to be monetized with advertising. That's the problem with Twitter as a platform like that. Like if you want to run it, like where you can put anything up there, it's sort of like if you went to Coca-Cola and you said to them, look, there's two homeless guys fighting with knives in the town square. Shall we run an ad behind that? They might kind of go, well, maybe that's not the brand image we're going. I appreciate it's
There.
drawing eyeballs, but
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
and also even like that thing was put forward. Like a lot of people said the advertisers are boycotting Twitter, and I don't think they're boycotting. I think they really just look at where you can put an ad where it won't embarrass you and where it'll get you clicks and sell you. They just want to sell you stuff. Like they don't
Totally.
really.
Well, and I said this in my video, which is that I don't think the ROI on Twitter ads has ever been great compared to other
No.
places where you can advertise, and I think that's actually a more fundamental problem because if,
Yeah.
in 3 months, if they feel like they're gonna get eyeballs and reach the right people on Twitter, they'll be back advertising on the platform. Like, they're not
Mm.
gonna stay away on some, principled
Well,
stance.
they
I mean,
might if
Adidas is
it's
still
just
selling Ye's
awful. Like
shoes, right?
if it's 4chan, like, they're not,
No,
like
that's a different thing.
Coca-Cola
But
won't
Twitter is
advertise on
not.
Pornhub, right?
Totally, but Elon was not actually saying this is a free speech bastion where you can literally say anything. Like he does still have rules around hate speech. Like that feels like it's gotten
Yeah.
lost in the shuffle to me. And I mean, you and I are fully on the same page with this. And the Elon thing is so interesting. This was actually what I was trying to get at with the video I made was just it is so fascinating to me the way in which he generates both extremes to such a degree where you have truly delusional sycophantic people who like
Mm.
really for whom he can do no wrong, and you're like, you know what I mean? In that interview with Jonathan Ross Sorkin with Andrew, he there were times where he just seemed unhinged, right? And you have a group of people who will never see that or acknowledge him as a flawed human being. But then you have the people who hate him, who think he's not even really successful. He didn't even really do anything for Tesla because he didn't found it, who feel also delusional in terms of the way in which they think he's a complete idiot and
Yeah.
he's done nothing of
Well, it's
value.
it's
And it
even interesting. I find it fascinating the way he's kind of flipped the polarization. Because a decade ago, you would have viewed, a guy who's like pushing EVs as a big liberal lefty. Like
totally.
everyone in California sold their Priuses to buy a Tesla, in order to have the new green thing. And now suddenly it's flipped where people kind of view him as sort of the hard right. And I kind of think I'm not even that sure that he's that political. I think he just
I
sort of
agree.
mouths off a lot, and doesn't really care about what he says. But that should, well, no, it does affect business, doesn't it? Because if anything you're selling, like to a certain extent, if how Tesla has gotten by with no advertising because Elon is the advertising.
Yeah.
But then the problem is that if Elon gets too polarizing, it affects the business, right? Because now you have to buy ads because the guy who, all the greenies love, they don't like him anymore. And the people who do like him want to buy diesel Dodge Rams.
I mean, yeah, as you're saying this, like, Elon in particular, like, there's so many rabbit holes I could go down. There's so many caveats I could give. Like, I have so many thoughts on him because I feel like to live in the world today, you have to have thoughts on Elon
Yeah.
Musk. And just so many thoughts on where I think so many people just their opinions are too strong, to your point, like, we just
Mm.
don't know. But so this actually gets me back to my original question, which is, do you ever worry about being wrong or being incomplete in the information you're giving? Or like,
Oh,
when
but
do you
you're
decide,
always
like, enough
wrong.
is enough, like, I've done
No,
enough
but
research
but
on
if
this
ever
thing.
you talk about the future, like if someone says to you, do I need to take an umbrella with me when I go out to the shops tomorrow? You know, a lot of the time you're going to be wrong. Like you will be wrong if
Yeah,
you whenever you pontificate about things which haven't happened yet. In fact, it's sort of that was one of the interesting things about quant trading actually is that not only like when you're doing short-term trading, you're right and wrong a lot. And in fact, you even know how often you're wrong,
right.
because you can look at the
You lost
data.
money.
While other people, there's a lot of people I'll speak to, and they'll tell me that they've never been wrong with an investment. And I'll say, well, tell me about your investments. And they'll go, well, I bought this stock back in 1985, and I bought my house at this point. And it's like, well, you've got two observations. You don't know if you're wrong. Like I do
Yeah.
100 trades a day. I know how many of them made money and how many lost, and loads of them lost money.
Right. I mean, even not about, like, speculative things, but just like, "Oh, I missed that fact," right? I'm alone here, I don't have a researcher, I'm sitting on my laptop
Yeah.
trying to get as much information as I can, and if there's, like, a whole, you know, swath of facts that don't somehow cross my screen,
Yeah.
I'm gonna put out something that is incomplete. But then again, and this is where I've said this, I don't know, like, to tell an honest story about anything would mean telling the entire history of the entire world every time, because
Yeah.
everything is connected to something that could provide more context. And so they're
Yeah.
at the point, like, you have to have a limiting principle and just say,
Yeah.
I've done the best, right? And that's
Well,
when
amusingly on that
organizations have to do
topic,
that too.
well, I made a video a while ago on kind of the development of China, and I sort of started
Yeah.
it with the revolution and Mao taking power. And I kind of said, I gave a bit of preamble to Mao, then we've got Mao, then we've got Deng Xiaoping, and how things changed. And the comments filled up with people kind of going, well, why did you start in 1949? And it's like, where'd you want me to start?
Yeah.
An amoeba
In the
crawled
beginning of
out of the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. In the beginning of time, there was a bang, Now let me explain Evergrande, Totally, totally. Anyway, I relate. Well,
Yeah.
Patrick, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for being so incredibly generous with your time, and you've just been generous as a person with me as we've chatted the last few days in preparation for this and giving me advice and things. So I really, really appreciate it. And I don't know, anything you'd like to close with? I mean, folks, if they
Not
haven't
really,
checked out
just
your
thank you
podcast.
for having me on. It's been a ton of fun. It's been an interesting conversation, and so hopefully the people who are watching will enjoy it.
Viewers like it. I'm sure they will. And check out, obviously, if you aren't already familiar with Patrick, I imagine folks are, but check out his podcast on finance, obviously the YouTube channel we've been talking about, multiple books, I believe.
Yeah, I've written. They're kind of university textbooks. Like
Light
th-
reading. Your
they're
beach
not
read.
light reading. Like there's a book on derivatives and a book on corporate finance and things like that, and one on statistics. So they're not. They're kind of university textbooks a bit. So yeah.
You never know what folks are into. So
Yeah.
if that's
An
your
excellent
sweet,
Christmas gift, that's how I would describe it. For the
get it for the
person
loved
who you
one.
can't think of what to get, a book on derivatives.
Textbook style too.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about writing a book with sort of your wit, almost writing a book in the style of your channel, where you have a little bit of wit thrown in?
Interestingly, I've a while ago, I was speaking with a friend who said, "Oh, you should write a book on that topic." And I thought, no, I'll just make a video because I get so many more. Like I put up one video, I'll get 200,000 views, and it's hard to get 200,000 people to read a book.
Oh
So
yeah,
the funny thing is that actually, like, if you want to communicate with the public, YouTube's a pretty good way of doing it. Like you can find an audience way quicker than a book that gets listed at Amazon and doesn't necessarily sell that well. So
totally makes sense. All right, I'll actually let you go since I've done the thing I do a lot, which is I said the last question about an hour ago and then continue talking. So thank you.
thank you.
Y'all know the phrase, not your keys, not your crypto. Well, in a world where too many people have had to learn that the hard way, Overpriced JPEGs is proud to partner with Ledger, the world leader in critical digital asset security. Ledger's Nano S Plus and Nano X hardware wallets, paired with the Ledger Live app, Ledger's own software for setting up your Nano device and managing your crypto assets, is the easiest way to start your crypto journey while maintaining full control of your digital assets. You can use all your favorite dApps with Ledger Live, accessing 15 plus Web3 apps, including 1inch, Paraswap, Lido, and Zerion. So you can not only manage, but also grow your portfolio. And Ledger Live is available on mobile and desktop. Securing digital assets shouldn't be complicated. Ledger is as easy as it gets. Uncompromising security, effortless connectivity, full transparency, Ledger is your one-stop shop to trade and track crypto, grow your assets, and manage NFTs. Secure your future with Ledger. Visit shop.ledger.com today or check out the link in the show notes.